Video game stories are often very creative works of fiction, but what happens when the story isn't the narrative in the game? What happens when it's a game-related story that sounds fictional but isn't? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 crazy video game stories that aren't fake. Starting off at number 10, back in 2018, a man stole an airplane. Now, this sounds like a funny story, but it's actually kind of sad because the man expressed, how do you say this without triggering any kind of algorithmic suppression? Intentions that were not oriented towards self-preservation. Yeah, so he stole the plane and had a long discussion with air traffic control. At one time, he expressed his desire to fly towards the mountains, and I think I'll leave it at that. But over the course of the conversation, he expressed that the reason he was able to fly, which had baffled people, the man was an airline employee, but was not a licensed pilot or somebody who had taken flying lessons. His response was that he was confident in his flying skills because he's played a few video games. Now, that sounds like a nonsense reason to be able to fly a plane. However, he took off and flew a plane, apparently even doing a loop at one point. However, he did crash at the end, perhaps predictably given some of the things that he said. At number 9, we actually talked about this during the pandemic, although we had to be a lot more careful with how we worded it. But the video game company that made the game, Plague Incorporated, repeatedly had to warn people not to use Plague Incorporated as a substitute for information on the coronavirus. Now, Plague Incorporated, as we've said previously, is actually a pretty interesting and detailed simulation of disease spread. That's something that they've actually gotten a lot of accolades for, not only in terms of people playing the game, but even from like the medical research community. It's not as though it's particularly removed from real life. However, it is also a simulation, and it can't tell you anything at all about a real set of events that are happening in the world. It doesn't do that. During the pandemic, when I originally heard this, my initial reaction was, really? People think that this is going to tell them about the game? But then, honestly, I think I get it. It's a game that's gotten quite a few accolades for accuracy, and deservedly so. It's a very detailed simulation. It's not like incredible in terms of graphics or anything, but I get it. I also understand why they were saying it's not something that you can use for information on a real-world pandemic as it happened. Anything that you learn from Plague Incorporated is very generalized knowledge, and I'm sure that there's some stuff that can be applied to coronavirus in the same way it can be applied to influenza. But ultimately, it's like if you had a simulation for meteor strikes, if you started playing that to know more about a meteor that was striking. Would you learn something? Maybe, but it's not going to be that applicable to the actual meteor hitting the Earth. Maybe take cover instead of play a game to learn about it. At number 8, a 10-year-old Wisconsin boy was accused of murder. It's even worse because he was accused of killing his mother because she wouldn't buy him a virtual reality headset. They're charging the boy as an adult, and they lowered his bail from $50,000 to $100 because there was $100 in his piggy bank. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think that they're not taking the right route with this. This is clear, serious mental problem. Like, 10-year-old kids don't act like that. Like, to some extent, this kid had to have been spoiled, but at the same time, very likely had serious mental issues, and that's not a good combination. It should also be said that the family said this child struggles with significant psychological issues, and I think that you can understand that because he killed his mom, stole her credit card, and bought the virtual reality headset. Like, I don't care how many violent video games you've played. If you shoot your mom in the face, you're not going to be able to do that unless you have serious problems. Kids become terrified over things like that. Like, when kids get a paper cut, they freak out because blood freaks them out because they've never seen blood before. Yeah, we're really bringing the mood up with this one, aren't we? At number 7, a guy tried to pawn a Sega Genesis with a whole bunch of crystal meth in it. So the question here is, why did he think that a Sega Genesis was worth pawning? Like, that can't have been the only thing he was pawning. I have to imagine going into a pawn shop with a Sega Genesis in 2015 when this happened resulted in maybe $10, if that. I'm being kind too, because I've seen a lot of Goodwill old school gaming systems going for like $12, $15. I don't see why a pawn shop would highly value such a thing. Unless, I don't know, they were an unscrupulous pawn shop which expected meth and was going to sell the meth. However, this was not such a pawn shop. When they were inspecting the console, which shocks me that they did, I didn't realize that people actually inspected old game consoles that you find on the shelf at secondhand stores of any kind. But they inspected it and found a bunch of meth inside the cartridge slot and then called the police immediately. They arrested the guy, and my favorite part of the article is the last line in it. It says, "There was no word on whether the Sega Genesis console was in working condition." Like, that's the big important thing to end on. Make sure that everybody knows. We don't know if this Sega did what Nintendo don't. At number 6, in 2013, in the UK, a study was conducted to figure out which console owners were the best at sex. So the methodology was they asked a bunch of partners of people who play video games, how would you rate your partner in the bedroom? Only 11% responded excellent, 27% said good, 26% said average, and 20% said below average. So yeah, people who play video games apparently aren't great at sex, according to this, but I would argue that, like, maybe that's kind of something that most people aren't super incredible at. It's not exactly something you get to practice a whole lot. I'm a bird, so I think I can exempt myself from this. But yeah, I'll bet it's not that different from, the general population. That said, they were able to figure out the console question. The Xbox users actually, for the most part, got the best rating by their partners, which is one of two things. Either Xbox users are better at sex, or they are more likely to have partners that lie about their partners being good at sex. I don't know. At number 5, a man experiencing a house fire, a deadly event that you generally go away from as fast as you can. An event where, unless someone was left behind, very important to you, very dear, maybe even a treasure possession, you might go back in to rescue it. Maybe. Depends on who and what, right? Well, for this guy, an undisclosed Xbox was enough. The fire apparently caused about $80,000 in damage, but the $300 or $400 that whatever Xbox probably cost him, he saved that. Also, he apparently suffered from smoke inhalation. This man actually walked out of the house with his life and thought, I need my Xbox. Went back in and got it, and then came out and was treated for smoke inhalation because, of course, that's a serious problem, actually. I don't think it had any long-term physical damage to him, but, everything that wasn't his Xbox went up in flames. At number 4, a dad tracked a guy down who beat his 7-year-old son at a video game and beat him up. Now, to me, there's a couple of obvious explanations. Firstly, this man does not know how to set a good example for his son. He thinks that winning is so important that losing requires one to go defend one's honor, including the honor of one's family. The second explanation, and I think honestly pretty likely, this guy is the guy who lost. His 7-year-old son is an excuse, right? It sounds like that, right? Well, you beat my kid at a video game, I'm gonna beat you up. Really? You're that big of a helicopter parent? All right, I guess, sure. I don't know. It sounds like he lost to me. It doesn't sound like his son lost. Maybe his son lost. It could be straightforwardly true, but one element of this is absolutely true. This father of a child went and beat somebody up over a video game. Either way, bad example, right? But crazy either way. At number 3, a woman who had gone missing at age 14 and was presumed dead because it had been a decade was found living at an internet cafe. So first off, everybody was shocked that this woman was alive and also was an adult at this point. A lot of the time when people go missing at age 14, it's reasonable to assume that a decade later they're dead. Not so with this woman. In fact, this woman was so good at Crossfire, people paid her to just watch her play it at internet cafes. She slept in internet cafes and public bathhouses for a decade, from age 14 to age 24. For a decade. This is a story from China, and it makes me feel like, yeah, I kind of get the gaming addiction thing that their government is all crazy about. That's, it sounds like a story from somebody who was addicted to drugs. Except it's not. And there are stories that play out exactly that same way. Somebody ran away as a teenager because they were addicted to drugs, and they're found later. Sometimes alive, sometimes, in fact, a lot more of the time not alive. But wow, that's crazy. At number 2, a strict Japanese mother demonstrates a new interesting family issue that can only arise when the parents play video games, and therefore is an issue that can only exist now. But this mother wants her children to learn to play role-playing games like JRPGs without guide. Like, that's a rule in this lady's house. In this house, we talk to all of the NPCs, okay? You don't get on the internet and go to the walkthrough and find out what happens. You figure it out yourself, mister! What is that I see on your phone? No, go back and show me. That's it. You broke the guide rule. You gotta go to your room, and you can't bring the Switch unless you promise to not bring your phone. This is the most insane thing I've ever heard. As somebody who grew up with parents being like, you shouldn't play video games so much. It's gonna rot your brain and mess up your eyeballs. Yeah, it's crazy to see that some parents are like, yeah, no guides. No, you keep a backup of the save, and you go back and figure out what you did wrong. You can get Vincent on disc 1. You go back and do it the right way. And finally, at number 1, this story starts out as a tragedy and turns into overcoming the odds. It starts off with 4 children aged 4, 9, and 13 who were stranded in the Amazon after a plane crash in which everyone else on the plane died, including their mom, which that sucks. However, these kids apparently were very into survival games, at least the oldest, and they knew which fruits you could eat and which ones were poison, and they made a camp out of hair ribbons and sticks, and there's no reason that anybody would know that stuff. It's just that they played survival games, and that's beyond crazy. They were taken to the hospital and given treatment and nutrition, etc. And in all seriousness, obviously, it's terrible they lost their mother. Nothing will ever make up for that. And nobody should think that because they survived, they're just gonna be fine. But in all seriousness, that is amazing. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.